Beloveds, this space is a church for Daniel, an autism-friendly virtual oasis for your spirit. I hope we find a new way to do church together, a way that prioritizes people over traditions, a way that celebrates diversity and creativity, and a way that doesn't try to make anyone smaller or quieter. It's a church for my son, Daniel. It's a church for everyone, and it's a church for you. Friends, for today's episode of A Church for Daniel, I wanted to address a really important topic, an ailment that can be a huge barrier to wellness for the neurodivergent, something that my son Daniel suffers from a huge dose of, and also a low hum in the background of everything people try to do when we get together. It drives everything, especially at such a time as this. Our government, our politics, our educational system. It joins many of us at our family dinner tables. It hangs out in the space of our clenched teeth. And I'm telling you, after 13 years in the pulpit, it's the single strongest force killing our congregations. What I'm talking about is anxiety. Not only is anxiety in America more common than rats in a New York subway, it's also hugely problematic. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, roughly 31% of adults in the United States will experience high enough levels of anxiety at some point in their lives to meet diagnostic criteria for an anxiety disorder as laid out in the DSM-5. At any given time among American adults, a full 19% of us are walking around with a diagnosable anxiety disorder. The plague of anxiety, like most other social ills, hits those who are already marginalized the hardest. Anxiety affects 23% of women, compared to 14% of men. 19% of folks living below the poverty line are affected by clinically significant anxiety, compared with 11% of folks making double the poverty line. And though the research out there yields mixed results with regards to whether folks of color experience higher rates of anxiety than whites, the research is clear that our white neighbors are much more likely to have their medical providers take their anxiety seriously, and are much more likely than our neighbors of color to receive appropriate treatment. Among the neurodivergent, anxiety rates are sky high. According to a research psychologist by the name of Dr. Megan Neff, a whopping 69% of autistic children between the ages of 9 and 13 experience clinically significant anxiety. Autistic folks have a 42% chance of experiencing high anxiety at some point in their lives. And severe anxiety affects anywhere from 42 to 79% of autistic folks, with rates varying widely based on factors like age, levels of support, success in school and work, overall physical and mental health, sleep, language skills, and experiences of trauma. And it must be said, all of these numbers only reflect the anxiety that we talk about and try to get help for. So imagine how much higher our ranks of anxiety really are when we factor in all of the people who don't acknowledge their anxiety, who never seek help for it and are just barreling through. Among our neurodivergent friends, anxiety hits its peak when they max out their ability to mask their genuine selves behind what society demands. Anecdotally, in my house, My Daniel has to cope with his anxiety every waking minute of the day. And it tends to hit hardest for him first thing in the morning when he's psyching himself up for the school day. And then again in the afternoon when he comes off that school bus and he can finally let loose after 7 hours of holding it all together with dental floss and gum for a system that expects him to stay still, stay quiet, use his words, follow instructions, eat cafeteria mystery meat, socialize with people he doesn't like, run laps in gym class, and add fractions. Remember that statistic that Dr. Neff quoted, that 69% of kids between the ages of 9 and 13 who are on the autism spectrum experience high anxiety? Well, my Daniel's right in the middle of that. He's 11. He comes off that school bus, he drops his backpack on the floor, he throws his shoes in the corner, he grabs his iPad and tells me, sometimes literally, to leave him the hell alone. He needs time to take that mask down and breathe while watching his favorite YouTube videos. It's a way that he copes. Now, some of us deal with this much better than others. Some of us have good language for talking about anxiety. We have high self-awareness. We've received good therapy. We have no shame around our anxiety and our anxious tendencies. And we have a plethora of tools in our proverbial toolboxes to take out to cope with the anxiety monster when it starts to crawl out of the swamp. This has become true for me, but only as I've gotten older and more honest with myself. When I was a teenager, I felt a lot like Daniel. I was overworked, sleep deprived, and masking. I had a lot going on. I wasn't being real with myself about it, and I had poor coping skills. I had to give myself a pep talk every morning when the alarm clock went off way too early so that I could get myself to get out of bed, get dressed, go through the school day, plow through another day. And it didn't go well, and I paid the price for it. But then in college, I pursued therapy, both cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavior therapy, and both of those were a godsend for learning how to cope with my anxiety so that I could be the healthiest version of myself and so that I could show up that way in the world. So one thing I want to put out there before I say anything else. If these statistics are sounding super discouraging, or they sound like a mirror that you're staring at with no end in sight, it gets better. Anxiety, though, can follow you around throughout your day like a ball and chain if you don't deal with it, holding you back from everything you're trying to get done. And for my Daniel, anxiety has been his biggest hurdle in personally feeling comfortable with giving that whole church thing a go. He's not a little baby anymore, and he's smart. And kids soak in everything around them like sponges, even when we think they aren't. Nothing passes by their awareness. The only thing that passes by our kids is their ability to deal with it because they haven't learned grown-up skills yet. Remember how I described what school feels like for Daniel? Well, that's a school day that's tailored to accommodate his special needs. He has an individualized educational plan, also called an IEP, and he's in a self-contained special ed classroom. And even with a day full of therapy services and help, it's so hard. Now, think about that and try to imagine what church is like. A place where there is no individualized church plan, no therapists, no self-contained cohort of neurodivergent peers who experience the world the way that he does. When Daniel decides to give church a try, he's the only person in the building who's diagnosed with autism. He's different. He's marked. He's also frequently one of only a few children present. And he's the pastor's kid. All of those factors combined means that invariably, even though folks are kind and loving, all eyes are on him for an entire hour. And he knows far more than you may think how much his behavior impacts my career. He walks through those stained glass doors and knows that Mom's job is on the line. He needs to sit in uncomfortable wooden pews when sitting is very unnatural for him. He may only stand in place when the asterisk in the bulletin says it's time, and he must sit again when the asterisk goes away. He may only speak when the bold typeface in the bulletin says it's time, and then he may only utter the printed words or sing the hymn lyrics. Now, admittedly, while I'm saying this, there are some aspects of a church morning that actually jive well with Daniel's autism. He loves memorizing speech, and he adores saying the Lord's Prayer for that reason. When Daniel was a toddler, he actually memorized the baptismal covenant after hearing me say it once. And boy, after that, was he ready to go baptize a baby. He likes to memorize songs. He likes to sing, and he loves music. But conventional church culture leaves no space for Daniel to play, to create, and to experiment. He needs that space, not just because he has both autism and ADHD, but because he's a child. That space is the space that our children grow in. He doesn't just want to sing the hymns. He wants to get up and dance when he hears music. He has this adorable little leg wiggle move, and he's so proud of it. But churches that I've served in the past were deeply unamused when Daniel got up and did his little leg wiggle while the choir was singing. And really, when was the last time you saw somebody dance to the hymnal? I think we need it. And I'm the pastor. So, hey, I say, let's just go with it. But Daniel and I both learned the hard way that sometimes in a congregation, the pastor and the mother of a child may give the green light to creative play and say, hey, let's get up and dance to the hymnal. Let's dance to the choir. Let's get up and walk around. Let's speak, even though the bulletin did not give us that bold typeface. But we're not the only voices and opinions in the room. The congregation might respond to my green lights with their own great big red lights and take back that experience of church for what they want it to be. Quiet, contained, and controlled. Now, folks, here's the part that I really, really need you to hear. When congregations lash out like that, folks who respond that way aren't being grouches. They're being anxious. They are so anxious. They desire order, control, quiet, and stillness, because those things all quell that anxiety, if only for a moment. They don't cure the anxiety, mind you, because if they did, church folks would have a much easier time trying to reach at least some kind of compromise with people like Daniel who are different. But in my experience, churches are among the most anxious places in the whole world. And time after time, the result of that anxiety from all parties has meant that a compromise was impossible. I give up on trying to have Daniel at church. The congregation casts him out and tells him not to come back. And Daniel decides for himself, whoa, screw this. It ain't worth it, especially if it puts my mama's job on the line. I'm out. Now, several years ago, I spent an entire year studying family systems theory with a place called the Lombard Mennonite Peace Center. It was very hard work, but for my ministry, it's paid off in dividends. This particular course in family systems theory looked at the churches that I and the other clergy people in my class were serving and how our congregations act like big families, even when not all of the people in the congregation are literally related to each other. Although, if you serve in a rural setting, as I frequently have, a lot of our parishioners actually are related, so family systems theory holds up exceptionally well in those settings. One of the biggest factors my teacher taught us to look out for in an entire system of a congregation and over the very long history of a church, going back decades and decades, is anxiety. When you look back at the whole system, all of the people, not any one or two individuals, but the congregation as a whole, and when you look way back at the history, all the different pastors the church has had, all the different changes it's had, all of the different building renovation projects, all the different losses, all of the different gains, big changes that have happened to the community around it, big historical changes that have come down during the time that the church has existed. How has the church coped? What were the church's big markers in terms of losses, transitions, and change? And how does the church cope now when unexpected things come up? The thing about anxiety in a church is no one wants to name it because it feels really yucky. When you try to get a church to do this kind of work with you, they push back just to try to keep that yuck away. This work makes parishioners dredge up a whole lot of bad memories, hard feelings, old conflicts that they'd much sooner push down and ignore. But the thing is that pushing down anxiety in a church, ignoring it, and pretending that it isn't there and just trying to move on, that never works. If you don't name anxiety and deal with it head on, it plants itself under the floorboards of your sanctuary. And it takes root, and then it starts to spring up all around us like weeds. We try to stomp it out and keep it at bay as much as we can, but if we don't tackle that anxiety head on and rip it out root and stem, it'll just keep growing in a congregation until one day we're all being choked out of control with sprawling vines that leave no room for anything life-giving to bloom. I'm going to tell you, even if it's hard for you to hear, that anxiety is the biggest barrier to access for our disabled beloveds trying to join us at church, especially our neurodivergent friends like Daniel. It's not the need for building renovations like a new ramp or an elevator or a large print hymnal, even though those things help. And it's not the need for a new safe sanctuary plan or a new kind of plan for dealing with this particular disabled person, even though that might help too. In generations past, we've held our anxiety over all of our beloveds with disabilities, even our beloveds with physical disabilities, which in the last couple of decades, we've started to make good gains in accommodating in our churches. And in the past, we've prioritized keeping our nerves at bay over making our church a place that is welcoming to all. In the past, we've said things like, oh no, we can't build a ramp. It will ruin the look of the whole building. We can't get rid of the stairs that go to the pulpit. They're historical. We can't have projector screens to make it easier to see the lyrics of the hymns so that you can sing them, because that'll just cost too much money. Do you guys remember my friend, Reverend Patty, that I interviewed just a couple weeks ago? He's my Episcopalian priest friend that I went to seminary with who has cerebral palsy. He shared with us that the anxiety that he has faced in congregations, that they've felt over having a pastor who doesn't drive, has kept him out of many pulpits that he could have served. Because anxiety over our differences has our churches coming up with all kinds of what-if scenarios. They're very unlikely to ever actually happen. But still, we're going to keep asking those what-ifs as long as we don't deal with our anxiety. Now for Patty, those what-if questions have looked like, well, what if he needs to go visit someone in the middle of the night? And there's no public transit to get there, and it's impractical to call an Uber, and the planets crash together and the oceans overflow. Now, I exaggerate. But so do the anxious folks who act like pastors are constantly dropping in on remote hospital rooms at 2 a.m. Now for Daniel, the what-if scenarios that parishioners have raised shocked me. And I'm really not a woman who's easily shocked. But these what-ifs, they shocked me. What if Daniel starts beating people up? What if Daniel breaks the computers in the church office? What if Daniel rips up every Bible in the building? Oh my. The thing about a disability like autism is sometimes it does affect a person's body, as it does for Daniel. But much more so, it affects a person's cognition and behavior. And our society hits the panic button fast and hard on folks like Daniel who don't behave and think just like you do. Now, in my opinion, most of the time, Daniel thinks and acts much better than a whole lot of people I know. But that reality doesn't matter a whole lot once the anxiety train leaves the station and takes over. And this notion that the developmentally disabled are dangerous because they're unpredictable, because they're loose cannons, because they can turn to violence, is not backed by facts and is ludicrous. But ableism is a very loud voice in our ears. And we have held these opinions about the developmentally disabled for a long time, even though we don't want to say them out loud. Those kinds of opinions are the reason why we live in a society that used to regularly house folks like Daniel in institutions up until just a few decades ago. It wasn't for the benefit of someone like Daniel, but it was for the benefit of your anxiety. Because if Daniel lived in an institution only with other developmentally disabled folks, you wouldn't have to deal with your what-if questions and your anxiety because you wouldn't see him. And so you wouldn't ask these what-if questions when you saw Daniel at your park, at your grocery store, at your school, walking down your street, or in your church. But now, we've come a long way as a society. We've realized that developmentally disabled folks like Daniel should live in communities with their families, with their friends. They should grow up in the same house as their mom and dad and their brother and sister. They should go to the same church as you. They should go to the same school that your developmentally typical kids go to. They should do all the same things that you do. And you should learn how to deal with your anxiety so you stop asking these ridiculous what-if questions and just learn how to roll out the welcome mat. The weeds of anxiety have overtaken huge sweeps in the United States, as I've seen it. They've sown distrust wherever they've spread. They've turned us against our neighbors. They've made our school teachers teach to unreasonable testing standards and live in fear of violence breaking out in schools instead of simply growing young minds. They've criminalized diversity. They've passed destructive laws, and they've put the most inept politicians we have in office. We are choking in the weeds of our anxiety. Do you want to break free? I know I do. I need Jesus, my gardener, to go in there and clear the weeds for me so that I can break free, so I can walk free, so I can breathe free again. And you need that too. So first, we start with the personal level. In the words of Philippians chapter 4, verse 6, don't worry about anything, but instead pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank God for all that the divine has done. When we depend on God, we stop coming up with harmful solutions to our problems. And better yet, we start to see that we don't have problems. We have opportunities. As Jesus reminds us in Matthew chapter 6, verse 30, if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will God not much more clothe you, you of little faith? We need to trust that God will come through for us. And every time that we start to ask what-if questions and the anxiety weeds start to shoot up through the floor, instead we look to God and say, all right, God, help me handle this. And then we need to handle it within ourselves too. Find a good therapist. They're worth their weight in gold. Learn some new coping skills. They pay off, I promise. Do breath work. Take a walk. Meditate. Exercise. Take a bubble bath. Pick up a new hobby. Learn how to cope with your anxiety weeds before they overtake your garden. And then learn how to spot the anxiety weeds around you before they overtake the things and people that you care about. Don't vote the weeds into political office. Don't make our school teachers teach to the weeds. Don't pass around the weeds everywhere you go. Don't bring those weeds to church with you on Sunday, and more than anything, stop putting a wall of anxiety in front of somebody who's different from you, who wants to come to church. Because chances are they went through a whole lot just to get to the front door. You have the easy job. Let them in. The what-ifs are lying to you. Your anxiety is lying to you. And hey, if something crazy does happen, guess what? We're the body of Christ. We'll deal with it. We can handle our anxiety so that it doesn't handle us. So that our church can be a church for Daniel, a church for everyone, and a church for you. A Church for Daniel is produced with love by the Reverend Natalie Bowerman.